So I'm not the most savvy when it comes to what goes on under the hood of our laptops and workstations. I do know enough to get by, but I wanted to take a look at some things that we could do to get the most out of our systems while doing the video and audio work that we do. So to do that, I asked a few friends who are pros in this area. So if you are a pro at this stuff already, you'll probably find this episode a little 101. This is more for people like me who know more about using a computer than making one. One of the people that helped us out with this were our friends over at Origin PC. If you haven't heard of Origin PC, they make really great custom PCs. They sent ours in these wooden crates. So of course we opened them with an axe because we have an axe.
I'm opening it!
They have really solid builds. In ours, we have the NVIDIA GeForce RTX 2080 Ti, an Intel Core i9, and 64 gigs of RAM. But they also have this internal lighting, which has nothing to do with performance, but looks sexy. I mean, don't act like you don't think it looks sexy. And once we switched from our old systems to these new systems, the performance increase was pretty insane. For instance, here's what it was like trying to edit large 4K files on Josh's old system, and here's that same footage on his new Origin PC. And that is what got me thinking about doing this tips episode. So let's get to tip number one. Our first few tips are gonna deal with hardware, which first up for that is making sure you have a solid amount of RAM. Now, RAM isn't as crucial for editing and rendering as it was 5 years ago, but it still is gonna help us with software preview files and cache, especially since we are often running several applications at once. So you'll want to have at least 16 gigs of RAM, but ideally you'll have 32 or more. Tip two, and this is a big one, upgrade your graphics card, also known as your GPU. This helps with rendering files in the software and demanding VFX work. RTX GPUs like we have can help with 4K and 8K footage as well as rendering ray traced effects. Adobe offloads a lot of heavy lifting to the GPU, so you'll want to have a GPU with as much VRAM or video RAM as possible, preferably 4 gigs or more. If you're inside Premiere or After Effects, using the Mercury playback engine utilizes the power of the GPU when working with the timeline, and that will help speed things up for you as well. A while ago, I stupidly didn't realize that I didn't have that set inside Premiere, so if you aren't sure, in Premiere, go to File, Project Settings, General, then here under Renderer, make sure you have this set at GPU acceleration. Now, inside our Origin PCs, we have the GeForce RTX 2080 Ti's, but as I've shown in other episodes, I'm a big NVIDIA fan. For post on my latest short, There Comes a Docking, I upgraded both my system and my editor's system with the NVIDIA Titan RTX graphics card. The NVIDIA RTX CUDA cores accelerate video and image processing effects, which means it's going to help a ton when doing color correction, sharpening, and upsampling in Adobe Premiere Pro, Photoshop, or any of the creator apps. And with GPU acceleration and Red Digital Cinema's latest release of the Red Cine X Pro, RTX is able to decode, debayer, and color 6K plus resolution red footage at 24 frames per second without using proxies. So if you're a red user, that's sexy stuff.
This is true.
And again, these RTX cards have really given us a massive increase in render speeds. For instance, let's compare rendering this same scene with the same plugins on Josh's older system versus his new Origin PC with that NVIDIA RTX card. So clearly upgrading that hardware will give you a massive difference for the type of work that we do on a normal basis. Tip 3, which is our last hardware tip, get the fastest CPU or processor that you can afford. This little guy right here, so cute. Well, behind the thing is behind this thing. It's back there. The CPU helps with the software and exporting process. It keeps the software running smoothly as well as any other software used in conjunction, for instance, Premiere and After Effects at the same time. The CPU also plays a major role when exporting the project to a file. This is where CPU core speeds, core counts, thread counts play a big role. I'm gonna be honest, they told me that and I don't know what that last part means. but it sounds fancy. Tip 4 moves us off of hardware into software, and this is one that is on the obvious side, but something that I constantly need to remind myself of. Close any applications that you don't need. Having anything in the background running is pulling power away from what matters. Things like Chrome are big ones for this, since Chrome is insanely power hungry for what it is. Tip number 5, in Premiere and After Effects, set Adobe cache files and scratch disk directories to a separate drive than the drive that Premiere and After Effects are running from. And then be sure to routinely clean your cache files out. This is very easy to do in the media cache section of settings. You can enter a time period as well, say 30, 60, or 90 days to automatically delete, or set to auto delete once the directory reaches a predetermined file size. And for additional Adobe specific bonus tips, I asked my friend Parker Gibbons, who is the experience designer for Premiere Pro, to give us some tips on how we can improve our work life when using Adobe Premiere.
I wish as much as all of you that there was some kind of secret sauce that made your editing machine 100 times speedier, but the truth is that it's about a bunch of little things that compound on each other to give you a smooth experience. Workflow, workflow, workflow. When you have a thorough understanding of what kind of media you're working with, how you're going to edit it, and what you're going to deliver, you can get better at pushing through the typical bottlenecks of poor performance from things like overloading your system or constantly transcoding between formats. My favorite overview is the Frame.io Workflow Guide, which is a 100,000 word interactive ebook about the post-production process and the best practices for all kinds of media formats and creative tools. A lot of people like working with newer compressed formats like H.264 and HEVC, but if you're going to do that, it's really important to have a machine with Intel QuickSync in order to decode footage better while editing. For that, you can go to Preferences and Media to enable hardware-accelerated decoding. And if you're rendering out to H.264 and HEVC formats with QuickSync, go to the encoding settings on the export dialog and make sure performance is set for hardware decoding. And that's great and all for specific workflows, but a lot of hardware struggles with H.264 and HEVC, so my recommendation is still to create proxies in a common editing format whenever possible. If you set up your proxy settings and turn on the ingest checkbox in the media browser, any footage that you drag into your project through the media browser will automatically begin being transcoded into proxies in the background using Adobe Media Encoder. Finally, keep your editing machine clean. Premiere is a reference-based application, which means that your project file and media live separate from each other, and Premiere looks through all your directories to load the footage that you tell it to use. If your whole hard drive and computer is just full of junk, then you're going to have a hard time getting the performance you want. So take some time every week to delete old files and organize loose ones into where they belong. And yes, I'm looking at you, people who just throw everything on your desktop and leave it there like an anarchist. The best thing is to remember that workflow is king, and if you can experiment around with your file formats and gear and workflow ahead of jumping into a project, you'll be better equipped to speed through work knowing what you're getting yourself into.
Logo. So there you go, a handful of ideas of how you can update your system and configure the one that you already have now to speed up your post-production life. Now, if you're like me and you would rather buy a computer than build one yourself because, I don't wanna, check out Origin PC. We've had these systems for a few months now, and I definitely recommend them. We're very, very happy with them so far. We'll put some links in the notes below for you to check out more and see what they have to offer and get some for yourself. And like I said before, I'm more of a computer user than builder, so if you have some tips on how we can speed up our post-production life that we didn't mention here, post your ideas in the comments below for us and the rest of the Film Riot community. And don't forget that we have our Christmas sale going on right now. Everything in the store is up to 30% off until the 24th. And speaking of Christmas, at the end of every year, we take 2 weeks off to spend with our family for the holidays. So this is our last episode of 2019. So until I see you again in 2020, have a wonderful holiday season. And of course, don't forget to write, shoot, edit, repeat.